Hi there, my name is Jonathan Dunnett, and today I'm going to talk to you about venture capital investment and thinking about criteria when it comes to finding that right fit investor or investors for your startup. And so we start with, well, why investors? And at the end of the day, we're really focused on two things. It's either capital or expertise. And hopefully, in most cases, you can actually get a combination of both of those things. Some challenges that can come with investors include things like they might be overly demanding or noisy, and sometimes they disappear. You might need to get a hold of them. It might be a critical time, but still they might be hard to reach. Maybe their portfolio companies have a lot of needs, or maybe there's some challenges that way. This is definitely something that can happen. Some investors just don't add value. They might cut you a check and then years later, you're wishing you could just get them off your cap table because they've not been all that helpful to you. And in some cases, they can even block good investors or right fit investors. Some real world things that have happened, investors being involved in romance schemes. True story. Not a great one, but that can happen. Investors ripping off companies that go through their accelerator programs. That has happened. And then even things like investors blocking other investors from coming in because for whatever reason, whatever their motivation is, they just don't want that investor involved. So that can be really problematic. In terms of getting started, I need to think about things like, is this even right for you? It is serious work to have somebody involved in your company that has a financial interest and perhaps other interests in terms of what you're doing. And really, in many ways, is a marriage. Not every business is right for venture as well. There are expectations that come with money. And it might be that your business is more suited to grow maybe 5% a year. And that's fine if you're happy with that. There are other companies that, they're well suited for much bigger levels of growth. And in some cases, when they take venture money, that's the expectation, is that they will grow at that trajectory. So you need to understand if that's right for you. Angel investors are different. This is in terms of money, in terms of orientation, in terms of, in some cases, their wiring and their experience. So again, you really have to think through what is right for you. To help you be more successful with this, you need to establish some level of criteria. You need to think about the firm level criteria. So that's the actual venture company that you would be dealing with. And then at an individual level as well. Because of course, the firm is comprised of individuals, and these individuals have motivations and behaviors and all kinds of things that are important to them. So you need to understand exactly who it is that you're dealing with. So when you think about firms, think about things like, who are you going to target and why? Sometimes the temptation can be just to go and see, okay, who are the 10 biggest venture firms in your space, and go and start doing cold outreach or networking to get to them. They might be terrible for you. So again, you really need to understand for your company who's going to be a great fit. That could be in terms of stage, it could be in terms of the expertise that they bring to the table. Whatever it may be that you really need, you need to think that through. So in terms of things you want to think about from a firm perspective, in some cases, they might be invested in companies like yours. So that might be both a good thing, but it might be potentially a bad thing. In some cases, they might be looking to make the other company successful and just to tank you because you have maybe better technology or a better team, or they see something in you that for some reason they want the other firm to succeed. So you have to be careful with that. They might be focused in your specific space. So whatever your company's in, they might have expertise that can be helpful to you or experience that they can bring to the table. And in some cases, they might just be generalists with money. Again, really depends on what you need specifically for your business, but generalists in some cases can be great. And just the last point there, re-emphasizing, again, remember what exactly it is that you need and your company needs to be successful. I want you to think about, on the individual level, what is the full picture of the person that you're dealing with? And sometimes we get a little snapshot of a person. You have a first meeting and it might be really positive or it might be really negative, but that's just a snapshot in time. And so we want to go from seeing just a portion of things, and we want to see what is the full picture. And so we need to have enough information to give us that canvas such that we can see exactly what it is that we're dealing with. So in terms of for you, you need to think through what is that ideal criteria for you? What makes a good investor for you? And so it's really about answering this blank. This could bring in a multitude of things. It could be things like personality or expertise, where they're located, the amount of capital that they can bring, their network, and who they have that they can tap into. Maybe it's from an expertise perspective, whether it's from a further fundraising perspective, whatever it might be. The more specific that you can be, it's basically a checklist. And you should be able to hand this checklist effectively to someone, and they be able to go out and more or less identify, yeah, this is a good investor for you. It has to be that level of specific. You don't want to write, they need to be a good person. What does that mean? So unpack that. Be hyper specific as much as you can. And in some cases, you might actually create both a positive criteria and a negative criteria as well. So that might be a helpful exercise as you're thinking through this. Just on the bottom, you'll note as well, people can change. There's all kinds of examples of this as well. People are not stagnant. And so that's something to be aware of as you think about risk, as you think about the level of equity that you're going to potentially sell to this investor. You just need to be cognizant and aware of who are you dealing with, who are they today, who have they been in the past, and what is the potential. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody, as an example, who has drug issues or they really love to party, that's a behavior that can accelerate and go into new places. So that's something to think about in terms of who is this person really, and are they going to be aligned in a right fit for me? So when we think about evaluating, when it comes to sources specifically, we need to look at who are the people that we know that can help us kind of get a sense of who this person is, as well as who the firm is that you're dealing with. And ideally, these need to be people that you have long established rapport with and that you can trust. And sometimes it might be that you need to go to other people in your network that you trust and then find the people that know. And so there's a little bit of sort of an extension of trust there if you don't already have those people in your network. Reliable secondary data as well can be really helpful as you piece together this overall tableau or picture of who the people are involved and who the firm is. And so as we think about this concept of the individual investor, I wanted to present to you this basic model that I use, which is the pyramid. And with the pyramid, when we think about when we meet someone for the first time, we might observe you wear glasses. That's a fact. And as we start to assemble a variety of facts, these start to build into areas of theme and ultimately themes. And so you can think about, like, when you met your best friend as an example, what were the things that you first noticed? And then over time, as you got to know them in different areas of their life, you really start to see sort of these areas of theme. And it's much the same ultimately that we're looking for in this context, is we want to understand the richest level as much as possible of who this person is. Like, what is the narrative? What is the story of this person? And that's typically where we see more of the level of, Joe is a great guy, and let me tell you all about them and run through that. It's who they are. It's their story and their ethos. And I think what's really important to point out with this is, as we get to understand from fact to theme to narrative and going up the pyramid, we have our context and our own biases that we bring to the table. And so it's critical that you have a good understanding and appreciation of yourself, because how you think about this might be very different than someone else. And on the other side as well, they have their context, they have their biases as well. And one thing that to watch is this idea of changes in behavior. And when we think about, if we generally understand somebody's narrative, we understand the top peak, we want to look for outliers. That's really important. Have there been times where you think about someone and they do something, maybe they're a friend or whatever it might be, and you say, yeah, they did that last weekend. I just can't believe that. That's not them. These are the sorts of things that we're looking for. And then we need to understand that in context of ultimately the decision of, is this the right investor for me or not? So as we climb up the pyramid, we want to understand the narrative. We want to understand that picture, that tableau of who this person is, but we also want to look for outlier points of behavior as well. And there's going to be, in some cases, some differences between you. And of course, this is important for context. And so whether this is where you're born or your gender or language or cultural background, whatever it may be, we have to do some contextualization within that. The Temkin village is something to really watch for. The idea here is in the Temkin village, there was a royal visit that was going through, and the local ruler wanted to make things look really nice. And so they cleaned up the facade, made it look great. But meanwhile, on the back end of the building, it's crumbling. And so that's really important to think about with people and with investors is the tie and the nice car and the private jet, that could be real, but you want to dig deeper and really understand what does the back of the building look like as well. And so when we think about things like individual investors and information sources, again, we want to talk about who are the people that we know within these networks that can provide some insight. Again, as we debias some of this information, because maybe one of your contacts says, oh, that person, they're such a tough animal and I would never deal with them again. That could be their perspective. Maybe they had a bad situation with them, whereas maybe 95% of other people that you talk to say, oh, they're just amazing. Again, it's perhaps an outlier data point, but we have to triangulate. Past people who have been invested in by the investor, people that are in the ecosystem, other founders, government in some cases, people that know the investor at both a personal and professional level. LinkedIn can be a great source to find people like that. Court and regulatory filings. Throw that into your favorite LLM or search, investor name plus lawsuit. Of course, LLMs do even a better job now with, you can just say, has such and such firm had any lawsuits that you're aware of? LLMs are not entirely reliable because they hallucinate, so check multiple sources. Look at tech news sites. Of course, you have to debias as you look. So there's a variety of sources of information that you can use to really help yourself. Those primary sources, those people that you know, are going to be the most helpful. Look out for red flags. Think about, how does this investor act towards people that they're investing in? What's their history? Are they a good actor, a bad actor? Are they nice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the rest of the week they're a monster? Like, you really need to know who you're dealing with. And just watch out and trust your gut. And this is where, especially if you're a first-time founder, talk to people who have been through the process, talk to advisors. If you see these weird things happening where they're trying to rush you through something, or maybe you're unsure of the actual source of the capital or whatever it might be, just make sure you're doing your proper due diligence. So when we think about the investor on an individual level, we want to think about things like, what are their goals? Now, within a firm context, the associate might be very differently oriented than the partners. And so again, this is we're building a tapestry, and we need to understand who the individual sections are and kind of what that looks like. But their goals and their motivations and their behaviors are really important to understand. Who's involved in the deal and what happens if your champion leaves? That's definitely a consideration. What does success look like for them? And, they may be truthful, they may not. Oftentimes, this is where we can ask them questions like, who do you admire? Or even just as they're talking, they might talk about various people that are important to them. How they present themselves can be really important as well. People will often portray a certain look and feel and vibe. So that can oftentimes speak to what is success for them. Pay attention to artifacts as well. So if you walk into someone's office and let's say they've got like a trophy, or maybe a basketball or something like that, or maybe a row of basketballs. Whatever it might be, those artifacts oftentimes have some degree of meaning. It might be a lot of meaning, in fact, but the things that people typically put around them will have meaning. So that can be a good little indicator to watch. How do they act? Think about how people act normally. Think about yourself. You act one way when you're feeling good and, life is fine and everything is copacetic. And then when you're under stress, it might not be the same way. And so if you can think about understanding that, that's going to be really important, because there's going to be moments where your investors are not going to be calm and serene. They're going to be stressed. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of LPs that are looking for them to be successful. And ultimately, because they are responsible for somebody else's money. And so you need to understand what that person looks like, both in a good state as well as a bad state, when it comes to things like communication and attitude and other areas. We want to think about going a little bit deeper. What are their biases? What is it that you're really dealing with, especially if you are a female-led team or you're a minority of some kind? This can be really challenging to overcome. And of course, one of the encouraging things that is happening in the world of venture is there are growth in these areas, but there are still heavy, heavy biases at play. And so that's something really important to understand. And this can even come into regional biases as well. You might look exactly like your investor, but they might have biases against you, saying, oh, well, you're from such and such an area, and they might look down on you for some reason. So it's really important to understand those biases. And it comes in all kinds of different categories. Look at their portfolio companies. Look at the executive leadership of those portfolio companies. See if it's changed over time as well, if they've shuffled CEOs or that sort of thing. And if you can talk to them as a source, don't necessarily go to the ones that the venture capitalists will introduce you to. Rather, reach out directly and try and have those unvarnished conversations. And then look at the investor background. What's their story been? As we think about that idea of narrative and story, how did they get to where they are today? Have they changed? What does that timeline look like? Have there been changes in behavior as they've gotten more successful? These are all really good things to understand and to look for. So for you, you need to also think about, what is your context? What is it that you're dealing with, especially as you're raising money? And are you coming in and you're desperate? You've got in the back of your mind, I've got 30 days or else we're going to have to shut down because I can't make payroll. Obviously, that's not a great place to be in, but that might be your reality. And so in those cases, you still can't just show your hand and say, yeah, we're dead and desperate for a deal. Other than it might just be being very plain to say, how long is your normal investment process? Because you might establish that as criteria. They might be too long for you. They might say, well, we'd like to get to know you over maybe 6 to 12 months. And you might say, that just doesn't work for me. Thank you very much. And we're looking for investors that can deploy capital within weeks and months, not years. That would be important to think about. Understand the industry, understand the customers, understand the environment. This is going to be really important for you to be credible in the eyes of the investor. And oftentimes, especially for investors that spend every day in a certain sector, they can smell whether or not you're genuine and whether or not you know what you're actually talking about. So that's really important, because the other side of that too is, if you don't know the value that you're bringing, you might have the best, greatest new thing coming to that industry. But if you don't understand the full industry and understand the tapestry and where you fit, you might undervalue what you're bringing to the table. So that's really important. As you think about for yourself, expertise is really important as well. The more that you do this, it's like getting reps in at the gym. You will get better, but you have to have good technique. And ultimately, as you look at both the individual and the firm level, you need to be looking for those red flags, and just to understand Am I being manipulated here? Is somebody playing me? So as you get data, as you're talking to people, you're going to have a lot on your plate. And so I want you to think about things like you're probably being lied to on some level. Unfortunately, this is just something that happens in real life. And most people are going to be lying to some degree. And it might be, a small white lie, but it happens. And so this is the importance of talking with multiple people and really triangulating and corroborating and validating what it is that you're hearing, what it is that you think you see, and so on. You might have a situation where somebody might give you a smile, but is it a real smile? A real smile, if you want to look it up, is called the Duchenne smile. And that's when you have a full-on genuine smile. I wrote about it last year at one point on LinkedIn. You can check it out there. And it's really important to understand things like smiles and nonverbals and that sort of thing, because you can kind of quickly understand, is this real? Is this not? And within that as well, you need to understand the culture of the people that you're dealing with, because there's all kinds of nonverbal communication that happens that in one area might mean one thing and in another area can mean something entirely different. And then even further on culture, there's things like Chinese face reading. That's a very old technique in terms of looking at someone's face and surmising certain things about them. The show Lie to Me is inspired by a real gentleman named Paul Ekman, who deals in the concept of microexpressions. The more that you can develop your acumen in terms of understanding culture and nonverbals and communication at large, the more equipped you are going to be. We want to have that story and narrative, as we've talked about. And so the more context that you can have, the better. And time oftentimes can be really helpful. I remember one example, and this was not an investor, but this was a startup where they had someone that said, I want to be a senior executive with you, but they put them on a clock. And it wasn't a week, it wasn't a month, it wasn't something like that, which could have been slightly more reasonable. They told them, you need to let me know in 48 hours. And it was just like foisting themselves onto the company. And ultimately, it turned out that they did not hire this person, which was absolutely the right move in my perspective. If someone's forcing you to do things really fast, or maybe you're looking at serious investment, maybe it's, 10, 20, $30 million investment. You probably don't want to go and meet and 90 minutes later say, yeah, I'll take your $30 million and have everything signed in 3 days. There may be people that disagree with that perspective, but ultimately you need to know who it is that you're getting into bed with and what it is that you're dealing with. So time is a great arbiter of truth, and data is as well. But as I point out here, human behavior can be erratic. As we talked about earlier, I want you to be cognizant of who that person has been, who they are, and who they could be as well, especially given the typical things that they engage in. And so if they live a risky lifestyle or they have addiction issues or whatever it may be, these are all things that we need to understand as we're evaluating investors. And corroborate. It's so important to look at multiple sources of data. I can't emphasize that enough. It helps you to debias. It helps you to zoom out and to see the larger picture. So that's really important. So as you think about when we evaluate the investor, we have our pre-meeting kind of activities. So that's we talk to our contacts, we corroborate with secondary information. We really want to be able to see. And unless it's a hard no right out of the gate, I would suggest take the meeting. And then when you take the meeting, again, within the confines of culture, because that's really important, you need to think about things like nonverbals, your body language, the behavior, how they talk to people, how they treat people. A great experiment that I've seen is get people to coordinate with a restaurant and mess up the order and see how the person reacts. Those sorts of experiments can be very telling and can give you some insight as to who it is that you're dealing with. In the meeting, look for tone, look for your words, look for repeating signs. All of these can be really valuable and rich sources. And then afterwards, if you've had multiple people in the meeting, which is oftentimes better because you can have different perspectives and people can hear different things and observe different things, debrief, you want to corroborate, and then you want to continue to close gaps in terms of what is it that we know, what do we not know, and what do we need to know, and how do we move this forward? And does it make sense to further investigate this? As I said, culture and context really matters. And so the example here is if you are a middle-aged white man from California, you may view this very differently than, say, an affluent elderly woman from Japan. How you're going to think about the world, your experiences, your perspectives may all be very different, and you have to de-bias yourself. A few other quick thoughts. Understand term sheets and how a deal process works. It's so critical because even slipping in one term there that you just kind of blow through the contract and you go, yeah, this looks good. There might be a clause in there that's hugely unfavorable. And so you really need to understand how this works. You need to have advisors and experts around you that can help you. A few other points of consideration. NDAs are only as good as the paper they're written on. And do you have the money to actually pursue if they violate that? I suggest having a blacklist, a gray list, and a white list. The blacklist is the stuff that you never ever disclose basically to anybody. Maybe your co-founder, you talk about it, but that's it. They're just things you never want to say. The gray list, depending on context, you may or may not want to disclose that. And when you think about when you're meeting with investors, your gray list might be something that you want to hold close. And then the white list is the stuff that's on your website and that you freely kind of talk about. Don't disclose your secret sauce. Ultimately, there have been companies that have lost because they disclose bits and pieces of information, or one person and then another team member disclose singular bits of information but put together that really compromise things. And so there's unfortunately lots of companies that have gone by the wayside because they have over-disclosed and given away their secret sauce. As you think about this, I want you to pre-mortem, so that's think through the what-ifs scenarios as much as possible. And make sure your team is aligned. I've seen examples and I've had clients where even the co-founding team is not aligned truly on what the goal of the exercise is. And if you can't get internal alignment, you should not be talking to investors. Think about the type of capital that you need. Like we talked about earlier, some businesses are really well suited to venture, some are not. Make sure that the capital and the expectations that come with that capital are a fit and aligned for you. And in some cases, it might be that you don't want to use venture. It might be that you use some form of debt instead. That might make more sense versus giving up equity.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in on this. And obviously I want you to double check and make sure always consult with professional advisors. This video is meant to be guidance, not necessarily advice, because obviously every situation is different. I'm wishing you all the best as you look to find that right investor for you or investors, and wish you all the best on your journey. Good luck.